Hello again, everyone. It's great seeing you again. Thanks for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather on this 22nd day of November, 2020. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, hazardous weather graphic. We've got a winter weather advisory there over the northern Panhandle, mostly along the Klondike Highway, Haines to Skagway. That's with the next system coming in, and some snow and a little bit of blowing snow. Also with the storm coming up that's currently coming up the Alaska Peninsula into Bristol Bay. Winter weather advisory out for tonight for several inches of snow and gusty winds up to 50 miles an hour in some locations, lighter elsewhere. That'll create visibilities less than half a mile at times in blowing snow. Also a winter weather advisory out for the Yukon Delta. And then a high wind warning out for the Alaska Range, central and eastern Alaska Range. And that goes into effect tomorrow night, actually Tuesday or Monday evening through Tuesday afternoon. And that's for winds increasing 40 to 55 miles per hour with gusts to 80 miles an hour there through the passes of Alaska of the central and eastern Alaska Range. And also a winter storm watch out for the Galena area on down into toward Grayling there and crossing the Lotto Hills to eastern Norton Bay. And that's for the storm coming in tomorrow, late tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, and through Tuesday. So that's a watch, but pretty sure went with the warning there for St. Lawrence Island, winter storm warning there for snow, blowing snow, strong winds moving in. Again, late Monday night and into Tuesday. Also for the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, north of there, we go back to the winter storm watch for Kotzebue Sound, Shishmaref, and the northwest coast there, Kivalina on up to Point Hope. And other than that, that's about it, watch warning wise. So a pretty good storm coming in again, already kicking the winds up over the eastern Aleutians to, pretty high values. Otherwise, satellite imagery shows that low tracking just south of the eastern Aleutians there, coming up along and should track just south of the Alaska Peninsula as well. But good cloud shield with that, pushing into Kodiak Island. Winds at Kodiak State Airport now gusting up about 35 miles an hour, a little stronger on the southwest part of the island. But rainfall hasn't been all that impressive yet. Just a few hundredths of an inch falling both at Akiak and Kodiak State Airport. And back to the east there, the flow coming down. We've got higher pressure building in over the western Aleutians and Bering Sea. And the gradient between the deepening low and that higher pressure building has brought pretty strong winds already. Let's see, Nikolsky there, Unmak Island, gusts 67 miles per hour today out of the northwest. And let's see, Unalaska, seeing gusts 56 miles per hour. And as that low passes by, they'll get stronger later tonight and turn more northwesterly, as will all the winds along the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and especially Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast here. Tonight through tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon. That includes the southeast coast. Otherwise, you can see that system there keeping it cloudy and some moisture in over the panhandle today in the form of rain or snow, depending on your elevation, time of day, and your latitude. Mounts weren't all that great. Hoonah picked up about a third of an inch of precipitation, while, Ketchikan had about a tenth of an inch, and then Juneau just a hundredth of an inch. So kind of varied precipitation amounts there, nothing too terribly heavy. And back to the system coming in brought about an inch, and let's see who had the almost inch and a half of rain fell at Unalaska to go along with those strong winds today with that system. So there's a fair amount of moisture with that, and that'll be sliding off to the northeast as well. Then the break coming over the central Aleutians today, and you can see the cloud shield with the next system just pushing in, or at least a cirrus anyway, pushing in towards Shimian-Attu this afternoon. Otherwise, just some loose clouds up over the interior with areas of clearing and basically light wind conditions. And on the chart today, the low currently will be tracking northeastward. I got a little farther to the east there than it actually is. That's probably good for 6 p.m. this evening. And again, the storm force winds back over the eastern Aleutians, and again, the Alaska Peninsula with gales up into Kodiak Island. and those will continue to increase tonight with areas of snow and precipitation on the increase for the western North Gulf Coast and southern Cook Inlet, and eventually into Prince William Sound. And for tonight, should dry out over the Panhandle. Be some lingering light snow showers along the eastern border, and still a chance of moisture down mainly toward Dixon Entrance. Whatever falls, Metlakatla, Heidelberg, it'll be quite light, and probably will end altogether. Otherwise, you can see the very tight pressure field around that 986 millibar low coming up toward the Trinity Islands there southwest of Kodiak by about 3 or 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. And so that gradient right across the Alaska Peninsula. Look for possible hurricane force wind warnings, definitely storm warnings all around the center there. And Bristol Bay, quite strong winds, snow blowing snow, winter weather advisory tonight for Bristol Bay. And precipitation mostly over southern Cook Inlet, and that's going to tend to start mixing with rain along the coast of the Kenai Peninsula, kind of touch and go there, and up into western Prince William Sound. Otherwise, the interior looking pretty dry and a little breezy over the Copper River Basin, but not too bad. That probably see winds increase later tonight. Stays light wind pattern up to the north. A few snow showers and clouds there, the Seward Peninsula and the northwest coast. Otherwise, the Arctic coast dry with clearing in the east. And then the break with that ridge shifting in toward the central Bering Sea. The next system out to the west pushing another round of wind and rain eastward. And that low center tracks up to just south of the Russian coast or west-southwest of St. Matthew Island tomorrow afternoon. You can see a good southwest fetch of winds there ahead of the front, pulling another round of moisture and warmer air northward. Being a break there for St. Lawrence Island, and that ridge pushes into the western southwest coast. And so winds will diminish over the Alaska Peninsula, but hurricane force wind warnings out for the marine areas south side of the Alaska Peninsula toward Kodiak Island, Castle Cape to Sitkinak, and then for the Barren Islands and the North Gulf Coast, western North Gulf Coast, with storm warnings into the northern Panhandle, gale warnings to the south with for a good shot of precipitation with that. Next day, that low slides off to the southeast and weakens there west of the Queen Charlottes. I'll keep it damp and unsettled over the southern Panhandle with rain or snow drying out in the north. High pressure just south of Dawson there and near Dawson will keep the central eastern interior basically dry and mostly clear with light winds. And then that next strong front brings the winter storm warnings into the St. Lawrence Island area on Tuesday through the afternoon, and the Seward Peninsula as well, pushing eastward gradually as you can see a strong fetch of south to north flow there. So it'll be changing over to rain from south to north, but first there'll be a period of snow and blowing snow and winter storm-like conditions there from the Yukon Delta across the Seward Peninsula and the northwest coast. Lows for tonight, below zero in the east, down to 20 below, say Northway or Tok. A little below zero in the Copper River Basin up to the upper Yukon Valley, and a little below zero for the Arctic coast. Otherwise, single numbers in teens to, by the time you get out to the coastline, 20s, and then 30s for the Bering Sea. Upper 20 or mid 20s northern Panhandle to mid 30s south, and 20s to lower 30s southern Alaska. Highs tomorrow, mid 40s Kodiak Island, lower 40s southern Panhandle, lower 30s in the north. Below zero a little bit for the eastern interior and some areas, single numbers central interior, and then mid 40s eastern Aleutians and the central and eastern Aleutians of Kodiak Island. And otherwise, looking at lows for Tuesday morning, below zero north of the Alaska Range, a shade below zero for the Copper River Basin, the teens, single numbers in teens, south central Alaska, and a little below zero for the Arctic coast and Brooks Range, but not too bad. And that'll be followed by highs staying below zero north of the Alaska Range over the eastern interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to Monday morning's first line weather graphic. We've got a band of marginal VFR from the northern Bering Sea, Seward Peninsula area in the northwest interior extending along and south of the Brooks Range. North side, north slope, central and eastern, as well as the Arctic coast, VFR. Swath of VFR there along the Yukon-Kuskokwim River valleys until you get down into the lower ends of the river valley there, both rivers, especially the Kuskokwim Valley. And then you get in some IFR out to the Delta, Bristol Bay IFR, Kamishak Bay, the Aleutian Range, Iliamna Lake, and up the eastern slopes of the Western Alaska Range, IFR, as well as the southern Kenai Peninsula from Kachemak Bay on up into western Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, IFR, Panhandle marginal, and next front out to the west with some IFR there over the western Aleutians. And that expands a little bit as it pushes northeastward on the strong southwest jet. spreading into St. Lawrence Island and Nunivak Island. Marginal VFR right along the southwest coast, and IFR extending back into the AKwx area. And then VFR for the Fox Islands, Bristol Bay going VFR, and Cook Inlet VFR. Marginal VFR lingering Kodiak Island, most of the Kenai Peninsula, especially over toward Prince William Sound, up into the Copper River Basin, and actually almost as far north there over the Upper Tanana Valley 40 Mile Country as Eagle. And marginal over the northwest interior, western Arctic coast, and IFR for about the southern 3/4 of the Panhandle. And then for Tuesday morning, marginal VFR for the southeast coast, and also for the eastern interior there from about the Upper Tanana Valley, around Fairbanks, along the central eastern Alaska Range, northeastern Copper River Basin. VFR, south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and Bristol Bay out over the water VFR, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. IFR edging into Unmak Island and toward Dutch Harbor by morning, and then on up to the north there into Norton Sound and the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta. And for the afternoon, Tuesday, that kind of hangs up along the coast there and narrows out some, St. Lawrence Island and southern Seward Peninsula there from the Bering Strait, right on down the southwest coast, Alaska Peninsula. IFR, mostly marginal out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and a band of IFR up along the northwest coast there from just about Kotzebue on up to Point Hope, and just catching the central Arctic coast, a little bit lower conditions. Otherwise, VFR, eastern central interior, right on down Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast. Marginal VFR from roughly, I'll say Yakutat on down toward Dixon Entrance. Passes tomorrow, VFR for both Adigan and Anatuvik for the Brooks Range there. And Lake Clark and Merrill starting out marginal, becoming VFR during the morning, becoming VFR. If not by afternoon, rainy, marginal becoming VFR. And for windy, looks good, VFR. And for Mentasta, VFR, let me back that up. Isabel, VFR, Mentasta, VFR becoming marginal, some moisture slipping up from the east and southeast. And Tanita, though, VFR. Portage, IFR becoming marginal. So still some improvement, but not quite to the VFR category yet until probably tomorrow evening later on. Otherwise, Chilcoot and White, marginal. Freezing levels at the surface, North Gulf Coast, cutting down across the Panhandle along the southwest coast of St. Lawrence Island, and 2,000 feet up into the Barren Islands there, north of Kodiak, and also out over the western Aleutians. Icing, two zones there with the big front coming in, occasional moderate rime icing, narrow band there, Kodiak Island, up along the southern Kenai Peninsula, Montague Island, maybe southern Prince William Sound, and again, just along or off the North Gulf Coast, but in across the western southeast coast. Looks pretty good for some considerable moderate rime icing. And then the next system out west, we've got one band surging northeastward there to the northern Bering Sea of moderate rime icing, and then the other one with the main front or in advance of the front back over the western Aleutians. And for the jet stream, we're looking at pretty strong jet coming up a flat ridge out over the Bering Sea. Headed in between the two storm systems there at the upper level low, passing over Kodiak, 120 knots southwest jet, and then at 9,000 feet southeast, 65 knots Kenai Peninsula, and pretty strong for the western North Gulf Coast, 80 knots out of the northwest coming down across the Aleutian Range and eastern Alaska Peninsula, 95 knots there out over the western Aleutians, and pretty strong winds around that low near southeast of Kodiak as well. For tomorrow, and that translates into some severe turbulence from Kamishak Bay, Shelikof Strait, all of Kodiak Island below 5,000 feet. Otherwise, moderate turbulence, Aleutian.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms. Why they occurred, the distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region, the rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense and what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data from numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. Well, one of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Big storm coming in, so strong winds go along with it. Very active front coming up, especially for the eastern North Gulf Coast. So we've got storm warnings into the northern coast of the Panhandle, southeast 50 knots or east southeast 50 knots, gusts 65 knots and 70 knots there for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And then the winds diminish and get down to gales on the south coast, southeast 40 to 45. And gales into Clarence Strait, minimum gales, southeast 35, south 30 Clarence, or for Stevens Passage, and light winds for Lynn Canal, north 15. For Tuesday, gales along the central and south coast, out of the east, northeast on the central coast, south 35 knots on the south coast, but those seas still 28 to 31 feet. North coast, east 20 with 23 to 26 foot seas. Small craft advisories for Clarence Strait for 30 knot southeasterly winds. And north 15 there for the Stevens Passage area, north 20 for Lynn Canal. And for Prince William Sound, strong northeast winds at 40 knots. That's good for gale force winds, gale warnings, and storm warnings flying for the North Gulf Coast. Hurricane force wind warnings for Barren Islands, east 65 knots, sustained 24-foot seas. And also 60 knot northeast winds for Kamishak Bay, 31-foot seas, and storm warnings for southern Cook Inlet for northeast at 50, north 35, northern Cook Inlet. Moving on to Tuesday, winds come down considerably in Cook Inlet on Tuesday, northeast 15 to 20 knots, and east 30 for Kamishak Bay, southwest 35 for the Barren Islands, and those turn westerly at 25 for the western North Gulf Coast. Much lighter winds coming up Tuesday than what you'll see tomorrow for the eastern North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. North 15, and then for Middleton Island, northwest 20. And for Kodiak Island tomorrow, storm warnings, northeast 55 knots, Shelikof Strait, northwest 55 knots, 31-foot seas there along the east side of Kodiak Island. Hurricane force wind warnings from Sitkinak to Castle Cape, sustained northwest winds 65 knots, seas 35 feet, 60 knot winds from Castle Cape to Cape Saratchev out of the northwest, and 45 knot winds for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. And for the Bristol Bay area, storm warnings northwest 50 knots. And for Tuesday, 45 to 50 knot southerly winds for the Alaska Peninsula out of the south as that next front rolls on in. So they'll probably drop off lower than that, or they'll be lower than that early on, increasing in the afternoon. Gales come back into Bristol Bay, south 35 knots, 10-foot seas, and 40 knot winds Sitkinak to Castle Cape, 35 knots southwesterlies for the east side of Kodiak. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, Unalaska Island, westerlies 35 to 40 knots, seas up to 20 feet. Southwest 40 knots, Unalaska Island. And some storm warnings on the Bering Sea side of Adak and Atka, south to southwest 45 to 50 knots, and storm warnings from Amchitka all the way out to Shimei and Attu, southwest 50 knots. 35 knot winds from the southwest on Tuesday for Shimei to Amchitka. Central Aleutians west 35 knots. Storm warnings for the eastern Aleutians. Westerlies 50 knots, Unalaska Island, Unalaska Island, southwest 50 knots. Seas running 23 to 31 feet. And gale warnings for the central Bering Sea, northern, or the Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, south 40 knots tomorrow, 30 knot southerlies for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, northwest 45 knots there along the Kuskokwim Delta coast with 11-foot seas, south 45 knots come into the picture there for the southwest coast on Tuesday. Storm force westerlies at 50 knots for the Pribilof, seas just under 30 feet, southwest 40 St. Matthew Island, southeast 40 for St. Lawrence Island, and even gales in Norton Sound for southeast 35, 8-foot seas. Central eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 20 knots tomorrow, east 15 on the west side, and then from Cape Beaufort down to Wales, southeast 20 knots, seas 5 feet. Those will increase to about full gales on Tuesday there from Wales to Cape Beaufort. Out of the east, sustained 40 knots, 14 to 15-foot seas. And east winds 30 knots, western Arctic coast, and east 25 on the central coast, and 20-knot winds out of the east for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, again, that strong storm approaching southwest Kodiak Island, so gale, storm, and hurricane-force wind warnings, winter weather advisory, Bristol Bay, snow and blowing snow, and definitely precipitation and wind on the increase, especially southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak, Kachemak Bay, and the Kenai Peninsula. And the western North Gulf Coast as it tends to dry out over the Panhandle. Tomorrow that low shifts eastward and along with a gradient, so lesser winds for the eastern Aleutians along the west coast. Next system pushing gale force and storm force winds into the far western Aleutians. And for Tuesday, that moves right up to the west coast. Winter storm warning St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula to eastern Norton Sound. Have a great evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.